different. Right now, our country is fighting over a bunch of stuff, and whatever we're doing is not working. I think we don't know how to debate right. We don't know how to discuss things. We don't know how to use logic to really dive into what we're even talking about. And it seems like all we get into is just battles. And even if you win, it doesn't change anything. All we're really trying to do is just recruit people, it seems like. Let me draw it out for you. So we've got one side, and we'll just call this the left. And we got another side, we're going to call it the right. And there's a definite hard line between our ideals and our arguments and what we're trying to portray. And what we end up doing is this side is trying to tell that side they're wrong, and this side is trying to tell that side they're wrong. And that's never going to change anything, because you're never going to convince somebody from this side that they're wrong if you're arguing from this, and no one in this group is going to convince them they're wrong. And even if they do, all they're going to do is just go back and find better arguments. The best that they end up doing is maybe convincing someone to come over to their side, or vice versa. And that doesn't really solve problems. Maybe it gives them more power, maybe with bigger numbers, but it's not going down into solving problems. So what we need to do to change this is try to get this side to tell their own side they're wrong. That's the only thing that's going to change things. And this side to say, hey, we're wrong. Let's kind of stop that argument. So how are we going to do that? I think it requires two things. First, you can't expect people to change sides if they're going to change what they're doing. And you can't expect them to change their beliefs. So if you could work it out where they keep their side and their beliefs and just stop the arguing, that would work. And the only way to do that is to break things down in a decisive way that it's just really obvious. Hey, we're arguing about something, this doesn't even make sense. Because one of the things we believe is that everybody has an opinion, and we think everything's an opinion, and it's not. Let's say there's a ball there, and one side says that ball is red, and the other side said, no, it's blue. And they argue about it. Well, we could find out what it is if we just stop and spend the time to look at it. And let's say we find out it's purple, and they're both wrong. It stops the argument. We don't have to argue over that anymore. So what I want to do is try to figure out a way to go through logically and try to look at reality and see what it actually is, and see if it even makes sense for us to be arguing about it. And if we make a solid argument that can't be debated, then those people will say, hey, this kind of makes sense, let's kind of stop. And it turns out a lot of the big things that we're arguing about, we're arguing over things that aren't really arguable. So let's start thinking about things, and let's learn how to treat each other with respect, and learn how to look through things and look at reality. That didn't, probably have to stop there and then start the next section.
We cut it? Yeah.
Turn the page.
We're rolling.
So we're going to learn some new stuff here. And the first thing we're going to learn is what a hook. I'm not good at. This eraser is not good. Learn some new stuff. And the first thing I want to talk about is something called a hook. Now, what a hook is, and by the way, I made up this term. I do that for a couple reasons. The biggest is that if I come up with a term, I could come up with a definition. So we're not arguing about, am I using this right? What a hook is things that people seem to universally accept that isn't quite true, that there's something wrong or a flawed logic in it, but we all just blindly kind of accept it. And exposing and diving into these is a really good first step to trying to figure out what reality is. And I want to warn you that when we start going through and looking at some of these hooks, you're not going to look at people the same. Some of these are quite amazing, that we're holding on to something and we really didn't even think this through. So I got that term actually from the music industry. And what they use it for is whenever they write a song, they always try to find that hook. And that's something that just universally people like and enjoy. And then the song becomes popular. Different melodies, different notes, whatever. So I kind of stole that word. But in our case, it's just what we're not quite getting right. But everybody universally kind of accepts that. So what I want to start out with to try to understand what they are, and this may not be earth-shattering, but there's two things I'd like to pull out with this next example. You probably heard the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? When I go through this, I'm trying to find examples to prove two different things. So I guess to start out with, and don't tell me why, but about how many people think it's a chicken? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people think it's the egg? Raise your hand. Okay. About half and half. So that's what I was hoping for. Again, don't tell me why, but we're going to go through this because the answer in all cases is the egg. Okay? Now, let me run through real quick some, examples of that I've heard that, when people thought the chicken came first. The first thing is, this is kind of a simple question. And what most people do is try to find a unique twist on it. But when you take it in context, something simple like that, you take the most easy, obvious definition of it. So like something like, hey, chicken is first because in the alphabet, C becomes before E. That's not really right. That's not what that question is for, but it's a unique twist. The other thing is I could say the egg, because an egg was around way prehistorically before any chicken formed. Well, we know that's not really what the question is. We're talking about an egg from a chicken. Okay, so if you just take it simply, it's really a debate on, hey, the chicken hatched from the egg, then the chicken hatched from the egg, and the egg came from the chicken, and it's a continuous loop. And then you eventually say, well, wait a minute, when did it start? That's kind of what the question is. So one thing I've heard people say is that it depends on your religious background. If you think there was creation rather than evolution, you would choose a chicken. Now, I actually believe that it's more likely for creation, even from a scientific standpoint, but that's a completely separate argument. So I would accept that, other than the flaw is, if it was creation, why would you assume the chicken? Why would we just create adults of everything? If you're starting a world, wouldn't you just make a living, one that's going to start out good? And if you all have just adults, that's going to be hard. That's going to be a hard start on the world. Why wouldn't they produce eggs? So I don't think that's a very viable, argument. And if you follow it through, it ends up the egg, which I'm not going to go into now to save some time. But at the very least, we can say that it's indeterminate on which they made first, even on creation. Another argument I heard is when scientists and engineers get into it and think they can solve it. And what I find is that they answer a question, it's just not this question. I've heard one where they said, well, it's got to be the chicken because we found an enzyme in the egg that can only be produced by a chicken. Well, that's great. You answer the question, can an enzyme exist that's not produced by a chicken? No. I screwed. My mouth is really dry. So. Okay, maybe we'll go back. So one of the things I've heard from a scientist is that we've discovered that it's got to be the chicken because we learned that there's an enzyme that exists in the egg that can only be produced by a chicken. Well, that's great. You answered the wrong question. You answered, does there exist an enzyme in an egg that can only be produced by a chicken? And thank you, yes. But that's not this question because easily, right from the beginning, okay, that chicken that produced it, what did it come from? So you didn't really answer the question. You answered a different question. Heard one that said, we found that something related to the chicken actually had live birth. So therefore, it's a chicken. Well, again, you kind of answer a different question because if we take this in the simplest form, chicken is kind of a straight term. It's not necessarily technical. And maybe you found something, but most people look at this and say, okay, chicken lays an egg that we're familiar with externally. So it didn't really answer this question. So that brings us to, why is it the egg? Well, right now, you probably have an image of what this question means, a chicken or an egg, the chicken or the egg, because one came from the other came from one came from the other. When did it start? Now, I got a question for you, and I want you to think about this. If you go to a restaurant and you order breakfast and you say, I want eggs, and they serve it to you, what are you eating exactly? And think about it. What are you eating? You're actually eating the chicken in an earlier form of development. So the chicken is always going to start out with an egg. Even if it's live birth, technically there's an egg that starts out with. So how did we get it wrong? Well, the question itself, to make sense, they had to be separate things. And as we grew up, from picture books and stuff like that, we always think of the egg and the chicken as separate things. So our subconscious kind of like makes it make sense. We know this is a valid question. We know there's something about this that's unique. Everybody else is thinking it's a serious question. So to make it make sense, it's got to be separate. So we don't even think about, hey, this isn't a separate thing. The egg is actually the chicken itself as it grows up and develops. And if we're really pushed to say, hey, the chicken hatches out of the egg, we think of it as a shell. The shell's not the egg. That's the part we throw away when we eat eggs. But our mind brings us to, it's got to be a separate thing or this doesn't make sense, because if it's just the same thing, it's not that valid of a question. So again, I don't think this is earth-shattering, but it kind of shows a little bit, if you thought what I think you thought, which is that it's a separate thing, what a hook is. Our subconscious does a lot of work for us. And what we actively see and control is a lot less than what you think. And so our subconscious wants to allow us to cope in a tough world. So it fills in the blanks. It's kind of like if you ever seen a posting where they write a sentence and then below that it say, hey, you read that wrong, and you look up and there's letters missing or out of order and you didn't see it. Your subconscious just kind of fills in and makes it make sense. So that's where a lot of these hooks come from, is that we just all, want to be accepted. We want to be, joining with the group. If we're an outcast or if we're embarrassed, our subconscious kind of keeps that from happening. So we all kind of fill in. If we all believe one thing, even if it's wrong, we just all kind of follow it. So the first thing I wanted to show is that the first thing I want to show is that the hook part of it and how our subconscious kind of helps develop this and hold that in and make things make sense. The second part of this is I want to explain another term is what I call the construct. Okay? Words are made up. This whole question is all made up. The dilemma or the paradox between, hey, this created the other, then that created this created the other. We call that a paradox. Paradoxes don't exist in reality. Only in this made-up world with words and different things that I'm calling the construct. That's what we kind of develop to protect us and keep us safe and make us feel like we're important. This is a valid question, but it's not about really what came first. It just kind of exposes that we have a hard time understanding slow change and how does a species just develop. And it happens over such a long time, we can't really grasp, slight, slow changes. And we like to think we're relevant. And if we really put our whole entire lives over the development of, evolution and the planet, we'd be insignificant, and we don't like that. So we try to think of things happening within our lifetime, and then this question becomes kind of difficult to understand. So we like to call it a paradox, a glitch in the matrix. But it's only in our made-up world. Reality is pretty simple and pretty obvious. So if we understand that, it helps us kind of solve problems where we can say, okay, let's put our made-up world aside and let's find out what's real. And knowing the difference between the two is real helpful. So we learned a little bit about a hook and the construct. Okay, so that was kind of interesting, but there's a much better example of what a hook is, because a lot of these hooks are just because they're complicated. It's hard for people, for anyone to understand when they get too complicated. So I'm going to break down something you may be familiar with. There was a game show a while ago